Hey, welcome back to How We Got Here. If you're new, subscribe now, because this one is going to change how you see the world. Literally. Right now, the United States has roughly 750 military bases in about 80 countries around the world. That's not a typo. 750 bases in 80 countries. America has nearly 3 times as many military bases as it has embassies. To put that in perspective, every other country on Earth combined has maybe 300 foreign military bases. The United Kingdom has about 145. Russia has a few dozen. China has 5. America has 750. No empire in human history, not Rome, not Britain, not the Mongols, has ever had this kind of global military footprint. The Roman Empire was enormous, but it never stretched beyond the Mediterranean, North Africa, and parts of the Middle East. The British Empire was vast, but its army was actually quite small. America's military reach today dwarfs anything the world has ever seen. So, how did this happen? How did a country founded on rejecting foreign control become the nation with soldiers stationed on every continent? The answer starts with a surprise attack on a quiet Sunday morning. December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Before that day, America was isolationist. The country had fought in World War I, hated the experience, and swore it would never get dragged into another European war. Most Americans wanted nothing to do with the conflict raging across Europe and Asia. Let Europe handle its own problems. Let Asia sort itself out. America was protected by 2 oceans and had no interest in playing world police. Then Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, killing over 2,400 Americans in a single morning, and everything changed overnight. America didn't just enter World War II. It transformed itself into the most powerful military machine the world had ever seen. Factories that had been building cars started building tanks. Shipyards launched vessels at a pace that stunned the world. Within 4 years, the U.S. had built an unprecedented network of military bases across the Pacific, Europe, North Africa, and Asia. At its peak during the war, America had bases in dozens of countries on every populated continent. When the war ended in 1945, most people expected the troops to come home and the bases to close. The enemies were defeated. Germany was in ruins. Japan had surrendered. Time to go home, right? But then came the Cold War. Almost immediately after World War II ended, a new threat emerged: the Soviet Union. America's wartime ally became its greatest rival. The Soviets had their own nuclear weapons, their own massive army, and an ideology, communism, that they were actively spreading across the globe. American leaders made a calculation that would define the next half-century. They decided that the only way to contain the Soviet threat was to keep troops stationed around the world permanently, not temporarily like in the world wars, permanently. A ring of American steel around the communist world. This was a radical idea. No democracy had ever maintained a global military presence in peacetime before. Throughout its entire history, America had always brought its troops home after a war. But the fear of communism was so intense that it overrode every instinct to demobilize. In 1949, the U.S. helped create NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, a military alliance that bound America's defense to Western Europe's. An attack on any member was an attack on all. That meant American bases all across Germany, Italy, the UK, Turkey, and beyond. Not for a few years. Not until things calmed down. Indefinitely. Germany alone ended up with 174 American bases. Think about that. The country America had just defeated in the bloodiest war in history was now hosting more American military installations than any other nation on Earth. The occupier became the protector almost overnight. In 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea. America intervened under the United Nations flag, and after 3 years of brutal fighting that killed millions, an armistice was signed. But the troops never left. No peace treaty was ever signed. Technically, the Korean War never ended, and to this day, Roughly 26,000 American soldiers are stationed in South Korea, staring across the most heavily fortified border on the planet. Japan was similar. After the U.S. occupation formally ended in 1952, American bases stayed. A security treaty guaranteed that America would defend Japan, and in return, Japan would host American forces. Today, Japan hosts about 54,000 U.S. military personnel, more than any other foreign country. The island of Okinawa alone has over 30 American bases crammed onto an island smaller than Los Angeles. The local population has protested for decades, but the bases remain. By the end of the 1950s, the pattern was set. America would go somewhere for one reason: build bases, and then never leave. The Cold War provided a permanent justification. As long as the Soviet Union existed, every American base could be framed as essential for freedom and security. Then, something unexpected happened. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. The Berlin Wall had fallen 2 years earlier. The Cold War was over. The communist threat that had justified all those bases for nearly half a century simply vanished overnight. This should have been the moment America brought its troops home and closed its bases. Mission accomplished. Threat gone. The whole reason for being there had disappeared. Instead, the opposite happened. The number of countries hosting American bases actually doubled after the Cold War ended. How? Because new justifications replaced the old ones. Instead of containing communism, the bases were now needed for humanitarian missions, counterterrorism, maintaining stability, protecting trade routes, and deterring new threats like Iran, North Korea, and later China. Then came September 11th, 2001. The War on Terror became the new Cold War, an open-ended conflict with no clear enemy nation and no defined endpoint. America built new bases across the Middle East, Central Asia, and Africa. At its peak, the U.S. had approximately 100,000 troops spread across at least 10 bases in Afghanistan alone. Iraq, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Djibouti, the list of countries hosting American bases grew longer every year, and the War on Terror introduced something new: bases in Africa. Before 2001, America had virtually no military presence on the continent. Now there are dozens of facilities spread across the Sahel, East Africa, and the Horn of Africa. The tiny nation of Djibouti, strategically located at the mouth of the Red Sea, now hosts a major American base, alongside installations from 7 other countries. The War on Terror added a whole new layer to the base network. But here's the critical thing. The older bases didn't close. The bases from World War II were still there. The bases from the Korean War were still there. The Cold War bases were still there. Each new conflict added bases, but nothing was ever subtracted. It's like a house where you keep adding rooms, but never tear any down. Eventually, you've got a mansion that sprawls across the entire neighborhood. Here's what most Americans don't realize. These bases aren't free. The estimated annual cost of maintaining America's overseas base network is around $55 billion. When you add in personnel expenses, it climbs to roughly $80 billion. That's more than the entire military budget of most countries on Earth. It's more than Russia spends on its entire military. America spends more maintaining its foreign bases than most nations spend defending themselves. And the cost isn't just financial. These bases have real consequences for the people who live near them. Local communities deal with noise from fighter jets, pollution from fuel spills, crime from off-duty soldiers, and the uncomfortable reality of a foreign military on their soil. In Okinawa, decades of resentment over base-related incidents, including crimes against local residents, have fueled a protest movement that continues to this day. In some cases, entire communities were displaced to make room for bases. There's also a strategic argument against the bases. Critics say that having troops everywhere creates a temptation to use them. Since 1980, U.S. bases in the Middle East alone have been used at least 25 times to launch wars or combat operations in at least 15 countries. The bases don't just project power, they make using power easier, which means America ends up in more conflicts. Supporters see it differently. They argue the base network is the backbone of global stability, that American military presence deters aggression, protects international trade routes, reassures allies, and prevents regional arms races. Without US bases in Europe, would Russia be more aggressive? Without bases in Asia, would China move on Taiwan? Without bases in the Middle East, would oil supplies be secure? These are the questions defenders ask, and they're not easy to dismiss. The former president of Ecuador once made a sharp observation. He said, if there's no problem having foreign soldiers on a country's soil, surely they'll let us have an Ecuadorian base in the United States. It was a joke, but it made a serious point. The arrangement only flows one way. Both sides have points. But here's what's undeniable. The system was never planned. There was never a grand strategy meeting where American leaders sat down and said, let's build 750 bases across 80 countries. It happened incrementally. One crisis at a time, one war at a time, one treaty at a time. Each one adding bases, none of them taking bases away. It's one of the strangest empires in history. Not an empire of conquest in the traditional sense. America doesn't claim these territories as its own, but it maintains a permanent military presence that gives it influence over every region on Earth. An empire of bases, as some scholars have called it. World War II planted the seeds. The Cold War made them permanent. The War on Terror added new ones, and inertia kept them all open. The result is something unprecedented in human history. A military network that spans the globe, maintained not by a single grand design, but by a rolling series of threats that never quite end. The next time you hear about American troops somewhere far away, remember, they're probably not the first ones there. There's likely a base that's been there for decades, built for a threat that no longer exists, justified by a new one that might not exist tomorrow. America didn't set out to put military bases everywhere. It just never found a reason to bring them home. And that is how we got here. If you learned something new, subscribe and drop a comment. What surprised you most? I read every single one. Hit that like button too. It helps this reach more people. Next time. Why is English the language of the entire world? The answer involves a tiny island, a global empire, and a war that changed everything. Notifications on so you don't miss it. I'll see you in the next one.